All right, hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Gura, and I am a master's level licensed clinical professional counselor in Illinois and a licensed mental health counselor in Florida. My practice is the self-care path, and I specialize in treating first responders. I would love everyone to take a moment and just take a nice deep breath in. And on the exhale, let your body relax as much as it can, because even a little bit is good. And pulling the shoulders down and away from the ears and feeling your toes or even spreading your fingers like starfish and releasing is such a good idea. I think especially for this podcast because I have Natalie with me. And I'm going to have her introduce herself in just a moment, but I told her before we even started that I'm just so impressed with the potential of this conversation and all the information that's in it. And taking a moment to clear the mind and clear the body and just allow yourself to listen, I think is so important. But without further ado, right, Natalie, can you
Mm.
please introduce yourself, tell us your website, and we will jump in from there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me today. So I'm really looking forward to this. So I'm Natalie Ribbons. I'm co-CEO of Reorigin. I'm a somatic practitioner, a mindfulness and meditation teacher, and a trained neuroplasticity coach. And you can find us at reorigin.com.
I love it. I'm going to jump into these questions and I'll tell the audience that we have 8 sections and we'll also kind of note the 8 sections in the podcast. But um, the first one being your background and your personal connection to this work. Can you begin by telling us about your background in policing and how that experience eventually led you to Reorigin?
Yeah, sure. So I started my career in policing when I was in my 20s. So I was quite young. And I had only ever worked as a frontline police officer and a first responder. And I remained doing that job for around 12 years, all in all. It was an environment where you're regularly exposed to a lot of people in crisis, trauma, fear, very high pressure situations. And you become really good at carrying on, regardless of what your nervous system is doing. And what I didn't appreciate at the time was how much that those experiences, along with the pressure of always needing to stay functional and composed, can actually affect us long term. So my route to reorigin came after I left the police. So I went through a period, the last kind of 4 years that I was in the police, I was really struggling with anxiety, depression, chronic pain, food sensitivities, and I didn't know where any of this had come from. And I learnt about neuroplasticity, which is our brain's capacity to change, and that role that it has. And I had searched for everything to try and help me with my symptoms and try and understand what is it, because I'm so good at just carrying on as a lot of police officers are, and I couldn't understand anything. But finding Reorigin changed the direction of my life. You know, I tried so much mainstream modalities to heal, and lots of that helped me. Lots of it did. I'm not here saying that Reorigin was the one thing that changed my life, but it helped me so much in my healing. And what drew me to it, it's not about understanding what's happening intellectually, but it gave me practical ways of working with my brain and my body in a community that understood what was going on. So there's quite a thread between the two parts of my life, because policing taught me so much about stress, resilience, and that human behavior. My own experience taught me what it can feel like from the inside, and Reorigin is where those two parts come together. And I guess I once I had healed fully through the program, the one of the founders, Ben Aarons, who I found on a podcast, that's what led me to Reorigin initially. I went to him and said, "What can I do to help? Because you have helped me so much." And I became a volunteer and then a coach. He funded me to become a somatic practitioner, applied in neuroscience, and then the rest is just history. That's how I ended up here.
It's so amazing to hear that we've come this far because this is my 20th year at the recording of this podcast and working with first responders full time. And I try to talk about the idea of post-traumatic growth and recalibration and doing somatic work and finding your own secure identity, whether you're in the work still, retired, or former, in the status of former. And sometimes people look at me funny and I hear this word resilience, resilience, and I think to myself, we never bounce back after trauma. We can only evolve forward. And if we don't talk about the mind and the body and its connection and the neuroplasticity that you can create within yourself, I think we'll remain stuck, at least in the United States, you know? So I love the beginning of this, but I'm going to jump into the second question we have, which is, what is one thing you wish you had understood about your nervous system while you were serving in the police?
Yeah, I think that it would be, I wish that I understood that being able to function under pressure doesn't mean that my nervous system's okay. You get really good, as I said, in switching into action. You're always scanning for danger. You're making really quick, really important decisions. You're staying composed, and then you're moving on straight to the same thing again. And I think I assumed that because I could keep going, that I was actually coping really well. But what I understand now is that the nervous system just gets used to that very high alert state. So you can finish your shift, you can go home and still be carrying that activation with you for the next day. And it then starts to feel very normal. And if I had understood that then, I think that I would have treated recovery from stress as part of the job. And it should be that rather than something that only people need to do if they're struggling or like me in a really chronic state. And I would have paid so much more attention to helping my body come back out of that constant readiness instead of, that resilience of meaning I have to just push through.
Absolutely. And I want to add that clinical jump to the HPA axis and how that burns the
Mhm.
candle at both ends and creates a very heavy allostatic load. And again, it's clinical jargon, and I know we're going to get into so much of this speaking with you, but it's very real, and we've connected and understood this for some time. But of course, the police, fire, even military dispatcher world, the emergency professions, it's like we don't want to talk about it or say anything.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
I'm so glad that you're willing to talk about it. I want to jump into section two, and it's about what policing does ask of the nervous system. And
Mhm.
the third question I have is, what does working in policing or the emergency services ask of the nervous system over the time? And where you think, I guess I want to add, people sometimes tend to block that out.
Mhm. Yeah. I think it asks something very unnatural from everyone over a prolonged period of time.
Yeah.
You are repeatedly expected to go from normal life situations into situations involving danger, conflict, trauma, huge uncertainty. And these are sometimes within seconds. Your nervous system has to mobilize incredibly quickly. Your heart rate changes, your attention narrows, and you're scanning constantly for danger, your limbic system. I tried to stay away from all of these technical terms, uh, but your limbic system's obviously part of your brain that is always kept us safe from danger. So if we take ourselves back to being in the very olden times, our limbic system would decide whether we needed to fight the tiger or run from the tiger. And our limbic system hasn't actually adapted so well in the modern world, but our limbic system keeps us on edge all of the time. So our heart rate will change. As I said, our attention narrows. You're scanning, you're making these very quick decisions. And you also need to somehow stay calm enough to function while all of this is happening. And that is a brilliant response. That's what your nervous system in effect is designed to do and help you do. But the problem is, we're doing this in the emergency services all of the time, and there's no time to come back down again. Just going off piece a little bit, if we think about a dog, for example, they would reset their nervous system, any animal in the world, by shaking off, like somatic, shaking your body. You don't do that. We don't do any of this in the real world. You might deal with something extremely distressing. You might finish the paperwork, you might grab yourself a cup of coffee, and then be sent straight to the next call. There isn't that moment where your brain and body get the message that you're safe, you're done now, and you can actually stand down. And when that happens over, months or years, being slightly on guard becomes your normal. You might notice that you become really reactive, you can't switch off, and you're scanning when you're off duty. That was something that I really hated, that I was just constantly scanning. I noticed myself doing it. Your sleep then changes. You need constant stimulation because you suddenly just feel really uncomfortable all the time. And I think that that's a very important distinction. It doesn't mean that the nervous system is failing you, or it doesn't mean that you're damaged. It's just become really, really good at doing what it's repeatedly asked to do. And for me, the missing piece was understanding that that resilience isn't just how effectively you can actually activate and keep going. It's also how you recover and how you regulate and how you bring yourself back down to baseline.
I love that you said that. And again, as an EMDR clinician, I've got to slide this in here.
Yeah.
Francine Shapiro noticed that when human beings were talking about trauma, that they sort of went back and forth,
Mhm.
right? And we do this, or we say, I don't know. And there's that slight little shake, and so I know you're saying that humans don't do that, or maybe they don't notice it, but it's that eye movement and that
Yeah.
bilateral stimulation of back and forth in EMDR that maybe is the shake of the human
Yeah.
and why it's so effective. And if we could listen to that and tap into it and understand our bodies do need to rest, relax, recover. We have to have transition moments. And we can't hear, well, don't talk about it, don't cry about it, and don't ask for help while we're in that process. And if we can learn to reduce that allostatic load, again, I'll bring in the clinical jargon sometimes, but if we can reduce that or at least teach people how to travel from activation to groundedness without going like, I'm going to ignore this, deny it, minimize it, or numb it, our nervous systems would be much better off. And maybe people would do this
Absolutely.
job. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. Yeah.
yes. So number 4, the question here is first responders are trained to remain calm and keep functioning during distressing situations. What can happen when that activation does not fully switch afterwards?
Mm. Mm. I think that when the brain doesn't fully, or sorry, I should say when activation doesn't fully switch off, your brain then starts behaving as though that emergency is still partly happening, even when you are objectively safe and you know you're safe. So during a threatening situation, your brain rapidly recruits networks involved in detecting danger, and directing attention and preparing the body to act. That fight, flight, flee, fawn. And stress hormones such as adrenaline and the cortisol, that helps, obviously, that really pumps in, and then our heart rate increases and our muscles prepare for movement. And as I said, our attention then narrows and we become focused on anything that could signal risk. Exactly what you want during an emergency. But the difficulty comes when your brain becomes so practiced at operating in that mode. So, after repeated trauma or prolonged exposure to danger, the threshold for detecting threat then becomes way more sensitive. So, your brain can start responding not only to actual danger, but things that perhaps resemble a previous danger. It might be a sound in the background, a smell, or someone's tone of voice, a particular environment, or even just a symptom within yourself, like that racing heart that we sometimes get so used to in the police. And in PTSD, we also see changes in the way that brain regions are involved in threat detection, memory, and regulation, how they communicate with each other. So areas involved in recognizing potential threats become highly reactive, whilst one part of the brain that provides context, say that happens then, but this is happening now, that might not always dampen the response as it should do in the moment. So someone may intellectually know that I'm home, so I'm safe now, but your body may still be producing that very convincing threat response. And that can be difficult to switch off after work. So it might produce things like lighter sleep. You might become more irritable. You might feel jumpy. You might, as I was doing, constantly scanning the environment or replaying incidences, even a long time after that particular incident has ended. And for some people, it can look very different. So rather than being obviously anxious or even wired, you may feel really exhausted, you may feel flat, you may feel detached, or as if you have very little capacity left on your days off. And what's really important with first responders is that you can still look very capable throughout everything. We're so good at continuing to do your job, make decisions, put other people first, and you just assume that everything's fine with that person. And this is goes back to what you're saying. Recovery is so important. So the goal isn't to stop your nervous system activating when there is that danger. We need that. That response is necessary and it is protective, but it's about helping your brain and body better distinguish between danger as that protective response and then you are safe. And it's important in trauma recovery because it shows us how these responses aren't a lack of willpower that some people just assume it is. They involve learned brain and nervous system patterns. And because the brain remains plastic, neuroplasticity, those patterns can importantly change. You can add your scientific spin on that.
Well, I almost want to dumb down that answer, like maybe a reverse. Because I was thinking of two things. One is sometimes I use this example of, let's say we are looking at this beautiful sunshine and the clouds are just gorgeous, and there's a beautiful tree and a prairie, and the grass is just swaying in the wind. And then we see the lion or the tiger. And we
Mhm.
go from this beautiful scene to I focus on the negative, I focus on the threat, and that's important. That's survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
But let's say it's the next day or the next present moment, and we have that sunshine in the tree and the clouds and the beautiful breeze. There's no lion or tiger, but you're activated and you're searching for it. So now you can't enjoy that moment, that present moment, because you are so wired to scan for that danger that you end up maybe even like me from we're doing this 20 years. I went to a concert a couple Fridays ago and I was doing the thing. I was scanning. I wanted to protect the family and friends I was with. I
Mm.
kept telling myself there are three police officers in eyesight. Like, relax, enjoy the music, let them do that work, you know?
Yeah.
And yet I found myself like unable to get up and dance or enjoy the show because I was scanning with three other women with me. And
Mhm.
so to me, those two are, it's like that um, imaginary example versus the real life one. And it does. It is hard even for me, who's heard these stories so many times, to shut off unless you consciously work through it.
I think that's the first step, isn't it? You are consciously aware that you're doing it. That's half the battle, realizing.
Realizing, right. And so it's very easy, I think, to get into an activated state and, like you've been saying, not know that you've continued to burn the candle at both ends, and the consequences are quite real, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
So
unfortunately.
question number 5 for you.
Yeah.
What are some signs that a first responder may be stuck in a prolonged
Mm.
stress or threat response, even if they appear to be coping outwardly?
Yeah, and I think that, as I said in the last answer, you may look completely functional. That person might be turning up for work, they might be making all of these decisions, looking after their colleagues, getting through the day, but internally, they are heightened and they are prepared for that next threat. So, they can show up maybe as being a bit on edge, struggling to relax, feeling irritable, constantly having a device in their hand, perhaps for scrolling to keep their mind occupied, difficulty sleeping, as you were doing, scanning the room, or finding it very difficult to switch off after work. Some people might also notice that they are replaying incidences, or even avoiding particular situations, becoming more sensitive to noise, conflict, anything that might feel slightly unpredictable. But some people go the opposite way and feel very numb, feel very detached. As I said, disconnected or exhausted, and just generally don't enjoy doing the things that they used to do. And you can see it in behaviors. So someone might keep themselves, constantly busy, rely heavily on exercise, guilty of that, or alcohol or other distractions, or feel uncomfortable when things are quiet because stillness is very difficult to deal with. So that's, having your device in your hand and constantly scrolling, keeping yourself busy. And one of the important signs is a loss of flexibility, I think. So a healthy nervous system can move into that activation when it needs to, and then it can settle again. But when someone is stuck in that stress, they can find it very difficult to move out of that state when there's no danger. So it doesn't mean automatically, I just want to caveat that you have PTSD or another diagnosis, but it can be a sign that your system's carrying more stress than it's had the opportunity to recover from.
I think one of the experiences I run up against when I teach and I say, these are all the symptoms. They're like, well, that's everything and everybody.
Yeah.
Like, you're just
Yeah.
trying to cover everyone in the room. And so I've said, look, every nervous system is going to have its response. And you're
Mhm.
absolutely right that we can see what I tell them is like a post-manic shift,
Yeah.
right? Where you're still activated and you're still going, going, going. Or we could have a post-depressive shift,
Yeah.
where the body's like, I just need to shut down. And that ignore, deny, minimize, numb extreme, I think it's misinterpreted as depression by inexperienced clinicians, or they call it anxiety. And I say, no, this is like a trauma response. And we have different parts that will respond in different ways depending on what the nervous system needs. So we can get into dissociation or we overactivate but that's all compensation work. And if you don't really see for yourself or notice within yourself that that's what's happening, uh, I think that misunderstanding just leads to like long bouts of therapy or no therapy,
Mhm.
and then no change with or without the therapy because there isn't the context of what you're talking about.
Yeah, there needs to be more Sarahs in the world. Absolutely,
And
yeah. Help
Natalie's
people
right.
to help people with that because that was, something very similar. It was just I felt that there was lots. I was diagnosed with lots of things that weren't necessarily true, and therapy was not helping. And it's not until you actually meet someone like yourself that is able to help where the changes start to happen and shifts happen. Really, really important.
Yes, and the mind and body are connected, and
Yeah,
when we approach it that way, instead of through the DSM or the diagnostics and the
yeah,
manuals, I
yeah,
think we meet the human outside the book instead of within it,
yeah.
Helpful
Absolutely.
book, helpful. Don't want to say it's nothing, but it's
Of course.
more beyond it.
There is, yeah. Yeah.
So the next question, it says, why might anxiety, sleep problems, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, pain, digestive difficulties emerge after prolonged stress and trauma?
And I think it's important to think about and understand that stress and trauma aren't just psychological experiences. They do involve changes across the brain, your autonomic nervous system, your hormones. immune signaling, all of your muscles, and even your digestive system. I was victim of that. Terrible food sensitivities. When your brain detects this potential danger, it rapidly recruits its threat and salience network. And the amygdala, your limbic system, part of that, the fear center, it works with other areas of your brain to decide where attention might be important or might be threatening. And at the same time, part of your brain called the hypothalamus helps activate the body's stress system, sorry. And adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol, they are the chemicals that help prepare us for immediate action. You've talked about the HPA axis, helps coordinate cortisol and the longer stress response. As I've said before, in an emergency, incredibly useful. So, as we spoke about, your heart rate can increase. Blood flow is directed to the muscles that you need, and you become more alert and you prioritize all the information that is going to help you survive in that very moment. So when you are on the front line dealing with somebody who, let's say, is particularly violent, you want that system to be responsive. But the problem arises where your brain practices that response again and again. So with that prolonged stress or trauma, your nervous system becomes biased towards detecting threat. So any neutral or perhaps ambiguous information can attract more attention because your brain has learnt that a missing danger signal might carry a really high cost to you. And that helps explain hypervigilance. So you might then automatically, when you go into like your concert, for example, you might have noticed where the exits are. Take note of how you're going to get out. You might think of all of these things, the slightest noise, it might wake you up and you might think, oh my gosh, this happened, this could happen right now. Your conscious mind may know that there is no immediate threat, but your limbic system is always a faster acting system in your brain and it's always saying, stay ready. We need to be alert. So sleep can be affected for similar reasons. So deep restorative sleep requires our brain to reduce that vigilance. So if part of the system remains biased towards monitoring the environment that you're in, falling asleep, staying asleep, or feeling rested can become really difficult. And trauma also affects the way that we process memories. So normally the hippocampus, which is another part of our brain, I always think the hippocampus is like a little hippo reading a book in a library. It's how we process our memories. It helps this, so it kind of says this happened there and it happened then. So it helps us with all of our memories and how we process it. But with PTSD, reminders of any traumatic experiences can sometimes produce a response that feels far more immediate. So it might be that smell, a sound, or a tone of a voice activates that threat network. And we find it difficult to fully contextualize it. And that's why you can say, I know I'm safe. Like you, for example, I know I'm safe, let them do their job. But your heart is pounding, you're looking for the exits, and you're preparing for danger. And another thing that's really important to say is pain, because I struggled with pain and that can be influenced as well. So your brain doesn't passively receive pain like a message traveling, I guess up a cable is a good way of looking at it. So it evaluates all of this sensory information using context, previous experiences, previous memories from your hippocampus. And then when your nervous system is sensitized or constantly vigilant, pain can sometimes become way more easier to trigger, or it can feel far more intense. Doesn't mean that your pain is imaginary. I just want to say that pain is real. That experience is real, but it means that your nervous system state is one factor influencing how strongly your brain interprets pain. And then, of course, there's the gut as well. So the brain and digestive system are in constant communication with each other. The gut-brain axis, which I'm sure you can expand on a lot more than me, but prolonged stress can affect that. And we can become more sensitive with digestive function, which is one reason that some people notice more nausea, bloating, changes in appetite during periods of intense stress. And then at the other end of the spectrum is some people don't feel obviously anxious at all. They, again, like we said, may feel numb or disconnected. That too can be a protective response. When mobilization doesn't feel possible, or your nervous system's been under enormous amounts of strain, your response might be to shift away from fight or flight towards withdrawal or shutdown. So, you know, first responders can still be functioning exceptionally well through all of this. You can go to work, you can make decisions, you can support all of these victims, make these life and death decisions, and look completely capable from the outside. So, functioning isn't the same thing as being fully recovered and what the nervous system has been asked to handle. I could go on and on about this forever, but I'm going to pause there because I've been talking a long time.
No, no, I love your answer. And, one of the things that brings a lot of people in to see me is not a psychological symptom. I have
Mm,
always said I've treated more men than women. And it is only when they're like, I have these chronic headaches, I have these stomach aches, my heart is racing, I don't poop the way I should, I'm not sleeping right. And when I was younger, I was like, why are you coming to see me?
yeah.
Because in the beginning, I was like, maybe we need to refer you out to a doctor, but I was new in treating first responders at that time, which has led me down this road to really understand that if they couldn't mask anymore, it started to show up because their body wouldn't allow them to look in control anymore.
Yeah.
And that is what brought them into therapy. And it is wild how, within the bounds of my work, we can end the shits and the heart racing and the I'm not sleeping well, or I have this chronic pain because we're working with the trauma and the nervous system. So everything you're saying is so spot on with my own experience. And I have to ask them, where do you feel this in your body when we talk about a feeling?
Yeah.
Because at first they'll be like, what do you mean? And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you said you were really pissed off. Where do you feel that in your body? And they're like, I don't. Like, what do you mean? And I'm like, take a deep breath in. On the exhale, close your eyes. I want you to imagine the situation you were just describing and
Mm.
only tell me where are you feeling it in your body. And then suddenly they're like, my solar plexus. Like, I just want to cave in. And I'm like, okay, great. Now we're making a connection.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think feeling your body, noticing your body, including the somatic work, helps them start to understand that the psychology is real, but also that the threat response and activation state is very real.
Yeah. I wonder how many people come to you saying solar plexus, because I think that that's probably a really common point where people feel that discomfort, right?
I said it because it might be one of the most common because it's associated with a sense of confidence. And so
Mm.
the other thing is that people come to see me when they're no longer confident. And again, they can't keep masking what they used to do isn't working anymore. And this is a
Mm.
folding point, right?
Yeah.
It's just we go into the fetal position at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Really interesting. That's exactly where I felt mine just to begin with was the solar plexus and asking that question, where do you feel it? I don't feel it anywhere. I don't feel anything, as you do, you just carry on. And it's not until you're actually asked that question, because so many of us are never asked, where do you feel this in your body? What do you mean? I feel things? Yeah.
right. Where I'm like, yes, and you feel them psychologically and physiologically.
Yeah.
They're not separate. You've just been dissociating from them. And the fragmentation between your mind and body is showing.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, absolutely. So the next question is, why do some officers experience difficulties only after leaving the service and taking time off or reaching a point where they become quieter?
Yeah, and I find this interesting because some people will say, but I was fine. Or when all of this was happening, I was fine. So why am I struggling now? You know, functioning at the time doesn't necessarily tell us how something was actually affecting you. And when you're operational, there is that structure, there's a job to do, there is adrenaline pumping through you, and you've got your colleagues around you. So your attention is being pulled towards the next task, the next thing you have to do. You can become very skilled as well at I can never say this word,
Compensating?
no, compentimate, where you put things in little boxes.
Oh, compartmentalization.
You've got it. That's the word. Thank you very much. Um, and I think that's partly as well because you have to learn to do that. If you attended to something awful and then another call comes in, you can't spend an hour just processing how you felt about that previous incident. You put it somewhere, and that might be somewhere consciously or unconsciously, and then you carry on to the next thing. And then perhaps you retire or you go on leave. You might, get injured, or your role might even change within the police service, and it becomes a lot quieter. And suddenly, all of that structure and distraction is then reduced. Doesn't mean that your body was literally storing this whole queue of trauma waiting for this quiet period. We need to be a little bit more careful than that, but it can mean that symptoms become way more noticeable to you because you're no longer continually on the go or occupied. And there may also be learned patterns of vigilance, that sleep disruption, emotional suppression that have become very deeply established over the years. And that, that's a thing. And then identity as well can play a part. So I would say that policing isn't just a job for the majority of police officers. It gives you routine, it gives you purpose, camaraderie with all of your colleagues. And it's a very particular role within the world. And losing that is a huge transition. So somebody can seem as though they've coped remarkably well while serving and discover afterwards that their nervous system has some serious adapting to do.
That is also when people come to see me is I've been injured and I'm off and I'm losing it. I feel like I don't feel right about going back. So their nervous system had a break during that injury time off, and now we're doing psychology work. Or when retirement happens, they're like, Sarah, I was sitting in the lazy boy, I was doing nothing, and my heart races, I'm sweating, and I feel under attack. And how come that didn't happen for the 25 years I did this job? And now all of a sudden I feel like I'm falling apart. And your answer fits both of those scenarios so well. So an injury, retirement, a vacation, even where you were supposed to really be connected and make a memory with your family, all of a sudden you are just one big body sensation. And so you're so spot on. I love these questions because I think they're so validating. They're so real.
I think that's what I really want to kind of get across and help people understand that you're not weak. It's not that you've lost the plot. I'm not sure if that translates into America, but yeah, you've not gone crazy. This happens and we need to talk about it more, and there are ways that we can help ourselves and each other through this.
Absolutely. So next question here. How can police culture, particularly the pressure to stay strong, suppress emotion and carry on to affect someone's willingness to seek support?
Yeah, I think that we have to acknowledge that those characteristics exist for a reason. So you need police officers who can um, remain functional around all of this distress. You need people able to make decisions when everybody else is panicking. And there are situations that put you under a lot of stress and strain, and not everybody can do that. But the problem, I think, comes when a useful skill or skills become the only way that you know how to respond. There can be that message of just get on with it, like we were saying with the solar plexus pain, don't make a fuss. We've seen worse. That dark humor that you have in the police gets you through it. And over time, you can become way too good at normalizing things that are profoundly distressing in almost any other context. You might attend something like a sudden death or a serious assault, any traumatic incident, and then just be expected to finish the paperwork, answer your radio and get on to the next job. When that becomes routine, it's very difficult to recognize when something has actually genuinely affected you. And people then start comparing trauma. They think, well, I wasn't physically injured, or my colleague Bob went to something way much worse than I did, and I'm still turning up to work, so obviously I'm fine. And there can be a fear, I think, around asking for help. Um, you know, and what that means. Will people think that I just can't do the job? Am I going to be treated differently by my boss or my colleagues? And is this going to affect my role or my career if I say I actually need help? And if your identity is built on being that person who stays calm, who protects other people, and who is able to handle these really difficult situations, admitting that you are struggling, it can feel almost like a threat to
Or a
yourself.
failure.
Uh, yeah, or a failure, exactly. And that can really delay people asking for support until things have become significantly harder. And I would love for us to define what strength looks like in these environments. So, strength is not feeling nothing, and resilience is not the ability to just continue to absorb all of this stress without consequences. Sometimes resilience is actually recognizing that something's changed within me. My sleep's different. I've become more reactive, or I'm withdrawing from people, or I'm drinking more and I'm just not myself, and doing something early about it. Because the earlier someone recognizes that their system's struggling to recover, the more opportunity that there is to support it before you reach that crisis or breaking point. And it is not weakness. I really want to put that out there, but it's good operational maintenance of the most important equipment that there is, and that is you as a human.
Yes, so powerful. And again, I want to embrace resilience because it's a popular word, but it's
Yeah,
very hard for me because when the first responder is sitting across from me in this very office, and they think resilience is pulling up your big girl pants,
yeah,
and not talking about it, asking for help or any of those things. I'm like, are we missing the point? Are we saying resilience as a buzzword? Should we instead call it something else that says we're not asking you
yeah.
to plow through anything? This is really, like you said, about the human and understanding we can recalibrate a nervous system. We can do post-traumatic growth. We can teach you how the mind and body work together in an alignment, and to notice when you're out of alignment with yourself, and that you don't have to just like force it back over here. We can definitely gently, with some sense and technique and tools, get us there. So
Mm. Yeah, and I think this could happen within the police itself a lot more if your managers perhaps just paused for a moment after you dealt with something traumatic, just putting it out there and say, guys or girls, all of you, how are you feeling about this? Let's take a minute. Let's take a minute to be together and talk about this because we don't have to be resilient all of the time. So I think that it could start within our shifts, trying to do that. Yeah, I think that's a whole other subject as well that we could talk about.
it is. And I think they're already very resilient. It's what you have to notice is, okay, if you're not doing something per your usual and you feel a symptom that is not per your usual, I love that word that you said, pause.
Mm,
Let's pause. I can afford a pause,
yeah.
and sometimes that's where we notice and we recognize our patterns where they've changed, and then we can choose, what we do next.
You've just exactly what brain retraining is right there. The pause and the choosing the new response. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Aw- Awesome. So we're in section 3, understanding regulation and neuroplasticity. The question is, what does nervous system regulation actually mean?
Yeah, I think that it's talked about online as though the goal is to just become Zen, isn't it? All of the time. Kind of like you
Yeah.
just said, one of those buzzwords. But it's not what regulation means. So a healthy nervous system, I think I touched on this earlier, is you should be able to activate when that situation requires. If I'm walking into someone being really unpredictable or I need to react quickly to protect myself or someone else, I absolutely want that alarm to go off to sharpen my attention and to prepare me to respond. It's about flexibility. It's the ability of the nervous system to respond. I would use the word appropriately to what is actually happening in the moment, and then adapt again when that situation changes. So during a difficult incident, I might become very high alert. My heart rate again might rise. I'm tense. I'm ready for action. I'm focusing on what I've got to focus on. My brain is prioritizing anything that could be relevant to keeping me safe. That is a completely appropriate response to the threatful situation that I'm in. But when that incident is over, I should then be able to recognize the immediate dangers past, you know, breathing again to be able to settle myself, my muscles, release some of that tension, as you did at the start of the podcast. Let's relax our shoulders, take a breath. Attention can then broaden again, and you can reconnect with ordinary life rather than continuing to be in that kind of stressful state where something might happen at any moment. For someone who has spent years in high pressure environments, that transition can become really difficult because your nervous system has had so much practice at being able to stay vigilant and mobilize very quickly. So, in a sense, it becomes very well trained for the demands of the job as a first responder, but less practical for moving out of that situation and state afterwards. So, when we talk about nervous system regulation, we're not talking about teaching police officers to suppress any responses or, maintain relaxed when you should be alert, just go into everything feeling really calm. Absolutely not. We're talking about increasing the system's ability to move more appropriately between activation and recovery and everyday functioning rather than being stuck in that state of high alert and readiness. And I think the distinction is really important because otherwise people can start interpreting any adrenaline or anxiety or activation as evidence that something's wrong with them. So normal stress responses are not the enemy. The question is whether our system can respond when it needs to and then find its way back down again.
Absolutely. So the way it looks in the therapy office is I don't want to do your, nerd ass bougie exercises. You probably had a perfect childhood, Sarah, and your nervous system has been regulated your whole life, and it's like, hold on a second there, and we are talking about the flexibility of moving between activation and groundedness and looking at that allostatic load and teaching you how to respond to yourself. You've trained yourself to respond to everyone else. Now let's, train to respond to you. And I don't want you to be a monk. And I wrote
Mm.
down a little example here. I went on my first ride along back in 2010 at Orland Park. So I'm going to call out this fire department, in Illinois. And I don't know what had happened, but somebody said something that really embarrassed me at lunch. And I turned bright red. And the firefighter, one of them said to me, he was like, I thought you were supposed to be some kind of psychologist. You are 20 shades of red, girl, And I was like, oh, I'm like, yeah, I'm not like immune to feelings. Like I accept my feelings. Like, of course I'm turning 20 shades of red. Like, this is okay. And he looked at me like, that's incredible that you're okay, that you're embarrassed or shy or having a feeling. And we ended up talking about that at the lunch table. And I was like, yeah, I'm not here to teach anybody to not feel their feelings, but there's some grace and style that you can have with feeling. And I am one of those people that can turn 20 shades of red. So I embrace it's like this is my response to that. No big deal.
Yeah, and I bet that conversation that you had with him, I am sure that that stayed with him, what you said, and that's probably helped him a lot in future.
I wonder if, yeah, the whole table just took a moment to know that
Yeah.
like therapy is not going to turn you into a nerd bougie therapist.
Yes.
So it's just human. We're going to help you be human.
Yeah,
You know?
totally. There needs to be more of that. Yeah. Yeah.
So the next question is, uh, what is neuroplasticity? And I know, oh, I think that's what we just did. Hold on. What do you mean when you describe the brain and the nervous system as becoming overprotective?
We haven't spoken about neuroplasticity, but I can go on to this first.
Well, yeah, maybe I crossed off the wrong one. So pause us for a second, right? We'll take a pause. And it says, what is neuroplasticity? Why can it offer hope to people whose brains and bodies have become highly conditioned to anticipate danger? Did I skip that
Yeah.
one? Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
good.
and I just think that it's important that we talk about neuroplasticity because it's Again, one of those buzzwords at the minute. Everyone's talking about nervous system regulation and neuroplasticity. But neuroplasticity refers to your brain's ability to change and adapt in response to experience, learning, and repetition. And it's one of the most hopeful things that we can understand about our brain. Our brains are constantly learning about what we from what we repeatedly do and experience. So let's say if you practice a musical instrument or a physical skill over and over again, the brain becomes way more efficient at carrying out that task because the relevant networks in the brain are repeatedly activated and strengthened. And the exact same principle applies in threat detection. It's important to say here to put this back to first responders. So you can become very skilled at noticing information that other people might completely miss. So you might learn to notice change in someone's behavior, again, where the exits are in the room, what somebody's doing with their hands, and whether the atmosphere may have shifted in a room, whether something just feels a little bit off. That ability, your brain has learnt that through training, experience, and repetition. So that can help keep you safe. But the difficulty is that repeated exposure makes those protective systems increasingly sensitive. So your brain becomes very good and very quick. It's the pathway that's most learnt your brain takes. So neuroplasticity is very important because the same protective patterns can be the ones that also keep you stuck as well as the ones that help create new neural pathways. So whatever you practice more, basically, your brain learns and you do. So we instead of your nervous system responding with this feels familiar, I must be in immediate danger, you can begin practicing a more flexible response. This reminds me of something threatening, but I need to take in this information. I need to, breathe, see what's happening now, and ask, do I need to mobilize? Take that second. And that distinction becomes far more available through repetition. So repetition is a huge part of neuroplasticity. So for someone who perhaps has spent years feeling as though you're constantly waiting for something to go wrong, neuroplasticity is really hopeful because it means that pattern that is so deeply learned, we understand now it's not fixed, it can be retrained. Not long ago, we believed that adults actually lost the ability to change their brain's pathways and it was only relevant to children. We now know that that is not true at all. And up until our entire lives, we can retrain our brains to create new, healthier pathways.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say a couple things. One, treating a trauma to me, I have compared it to popping a zit. And I know that sounds kind of gross, but I'm like, that almost is the easy part for me and my client is we have that one incident, a trauma, and it pops like a zit to me. The healing afterwards, it's taking care of the skin in this metaphor, letting the redness go and heal. And that post-traumatic growth is different. And I also was thinking about how I'm doing 2 new therapies for myself in the last 12 months. One is I joined tap dancing, which sounds really ridiculous, and it kind of is. And I was astounded at how I had no neuroplasticity for tap dancing, okay? But I started class again just on Monday into this 3rd semester, plus a summer of tap dancing. And I was absolutely delighted that I'm like, I think I really grew here. I didn't see it the 1st semester or the second, and I felt intimidated through the summer. But something about right now, I noticed the neuroplasticity, that my mind-body connection is different, and that um, we have neurons that literally look like our hand, right? The neuron with the dendrites and the axon hillock and the axon itself. And my skin here would be the myelineal sheath. And so my nerd brain was like, my myelineal sheaths have thickened in tap dancing and the neurons are firing faster. And I'm able to do this. And I know I needed that therapy, as unlikely as it seemed, to be helpful. And the second thing was reading non-textbooks. So I started reading fiction this year, which is really strange because I'm like, this is a waste of time. This is stupid. Why would I read these stories when I could be reading information and learning? And it's crazy that in my mid 40s, I'm like, these stories are a delightful way to retrain my brain off of this constant exposure to trauma. So it's not just like, I don't want people to picture, like we're rewiring your brain. It's bringing new experiences and allowing yourself to grow and develop as a person.
And I think both of those things, so the tap dancing and the reading of nonfiction, novelty as well. And novelty, our brains love novelty and it helps with neuroplasticity and building those new connections. So both of those things, kudos to you for doing that. Well done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you got to
Yeah,
practice what you preach, I've heard.
absolutely. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. Well
So now that question that I thought we were on, what do you mean when you describe the brain and nervous system as becoming overprotective?
Yeah, I mean that the systems learn to respond to possible danger very quickly and sometimes so quickly that it begins reacting to things that aren't actually dangerous within that present moment. So the brain is constantly making predictions based on previous experiences. It's asking, have I encountered, and this is all outside your conscious awareness, by the way, but have I encountered something like this before? Did it matter? And if the answer has repeatedly been yes, especially in the context of trauma or exposure to threat, the threshold for sounding that alarm can become more sensitive. So a useful analogy is a smoke detector. I don't know if you use this at all, but you want it to go off when there's a fire. That's really useful. It protects you. But if it becomes very sensitive and it starts going off every time that you make toast, it's not to say that your alarm is useless, but it's just responding way too easily to something that might resemble danger. And the nervous system can do something very similar. Again, going back to all the sensory things like a smell, a touch, or someone's facial expression, a tone of a voice. Crowded environments, for example, might resemble something that associated with something previously that might be threatening to you, a threatening experience. Your brain can then prepare the body before your conscious mind has even worked out why. So it means that, your heart might start racing. You might feel this urge to escape, or you become frozen or disconnected. And intellectually, you might know that you're safe. I keep going back to this because it's frustrating. Intellectually, you know this, but that
Yeah.
faster limbic system, that protective system, is saying, I recognize something here and I'm not going to take any chances. And in trauma and PTSD, it can involve the way that memories are contextualized. So your brain may respond to a reminder of a previous event as though it is way more immediate than it actually is, which is why someone can have a strong physical response to something that another person might not even or barely notice. So for people that are first responders, it makes a lot of sense. So when you consider what your brain has been trained to do, right? You spent years of learning and noticing subtle changes in people's behavior, in movement, just a small shift in someone's hand or a small shift in the way that the atmosphere feels. Your brain becomes very efficient at detecting those signals. And there is the challenge that sometimes that protective learning begins to spill into situations where that vigilance is just not required. And I think the word overprotective can be very useful because it changes the conversation from, well, what's wrong with my brain, towards something more like, what has my brain learnt to do to just protect me or in order to protect me. And that gives us something that we can work with. So we're not trying to switch off your ability to recognize danger, very important again, but we're helping the brain become more more accurate in distinguishing between danger that's happening now and a reminder of danger from the past. And because those responses involve learning, neuroplasticity means that they're not necessarily fixed, with repeated experiences of noticing the trigger, orientating to the present moment and responding differently, brain retraining, your nervous system gradually responds better, and it notices and recognizes this feels familiar, but it's not the exact same situation.
Oh gosh, I'm kind of giggling at myself. So one, we do call it a present day trigger can activate an old point of disturbance. And so, of course, I was thinking about tap dancing again, and I was surprised what a crisis it was for me because we do these recitals, and my body responded like, "You're not good enough." It wasn't a body expression, it wasn't a threat of danger. It was, "Are you even good enough to do something like this?" Which, when you first start working with first responders, there is a, you better be good enough, you better understand us, you better know what you're talking about, or you're out of here.
Yeah.
And I used to sweat profusely when I first started teaching first responders. And then I would have speakers crash. And I think in the tap dancing recitals, I'm like, Sarah, there is no danger. Like, this is so silly. This is the most goofy shit you could be doing. You're tap dancing, there's no danger. And yet some of that, "Are you even good enough?" showed up. So I also wanted to add that it's not just scanning for like actual and real danger. There's psychological dangers, like, "I'm not good enough. I'm permanently damaged. I'm not in control. I can't let my feelings out. I don't deserve, I'm not worthy of something." And those negative cognitions sometimes are the dangers that we've learned to mask and hide from. And
Yeah.
so, again, more neuroplasticity, Sarah, as I face the very not dangerous tap dancing exercises.
Well, yeah, but also our brains, talking about this is a whole other conversation again, but negativity bias. So as humans, we are always looking at the negative of a situation rather than the positive. So we are, am I good enough? Am I, instead of being like, I know that I can do this, we're always judging ourselves and thinking about the worst case scenario. So that's exactly that.
Yes, and I want to, speak about how human and how normal this is, and that even I can't perfect it. I can't unhuman myself, become a monk or an alien. Like, in this world, I just accept being human and how flexible of an experience that has to be for me to be a healthy person.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how might someone begin to recognize the difference between genuine present day danger and protective response being triggered by something that resembles the past?
I think, yeah, the first step is to become curious about your reaction rather than immediately trying to suppress it or convince yourself, as you've experienced, you said through this conversation, that you shouldn't be feeling this. When the brain detects something that resembles a previous threat, that protective response can begin the more reflective part of the brain that has fully assessed what's happening. So you might notice, all of these things, an urge to escape or, an urge to defend yourself or a sudden feeling of fear before you've consciously worked out why. And at that point, I would start asking, what's just happened? What was my system reacting to? And is there an immediate danger that actually required that action right now? Is that your tap dancing in it right there?
It,
And to,
Go ahead.
yeah. No, I was going to say to that last question, it's really important because we never want nervous system work to become a way of talking ourselves out of that genuine danger. If somebody is actually threatening you, and if that environment is unsafe, your instincts are telling you that something genuinely requires you to deal with that situation. I'm not here saying that as a police officer, you just need to breathe deeply and visualize that meadow where it's, and walk into it. Everything's going to be okay, guys. That's not what we're saying. But sometimes you look at the present situation and realize that the intensity of the response is way more greater than the level of danger that there actually is. So maybe somebody's speaking a bit sharply to you, and suddenly your heart starts pounding and you feel very defensive, and every part of you wants to leave that situation. Rather than judging yourself and thinking, well, this is really ridiculous, and why am I acting or reacting like this? You just become interested in what the brain may have recognized. Perhaps it's that tone of voice that resembles something from an experience in the past, or a conflict has meant that something bad is about to happen to you. The brain is very, very good at pattern recognition and protective systems that are deliberately bias towards caution, that negativity bias that I've just touched on from a survival perspective. We need to constantly be scanning and assessing, but we also need to make sure that we're Is this actually needed? So the next part is helping the brain take in the context of that present moment. So I might look around and ask, where am I? Who am I with? What is actually happening now? And what
Mhm.
evidence tells me that I am safe or I'm unsafe? And what choices do I have today that may not have actually happened during that original experience? That process engages more than positive thinking. You're helping your brain integrate that current sensory and contextual information that automatically that automatic response that isn't necessarily that toaster, that fire alarm going off full pelt. And in trauma and PTSD, that distinction between then and now, it can sometimes get a bit blurred. So a reminder of something dangerous can produce a response that feels very immediate. And even though that event is no longer happening. And part of recovery is repeatedly helping the brain update the prediction. Yep, something about this reminds me of what happened before, but this situation is different. That's then, and this is now. And I think that that's much more of a compassionate and useful response rather than just simply telling yourself to calm down. You're not denying the response or fighting your nervous system, but you're acknowledging that it's just there trying to protect you, and you're checking whether its prediction fits with that present situation, and you're giving your brain new information.
You have a complete answer, but again, I just am so compelled to share that in the therapy office, Natalie. It sounds like this on my end. Oh, you did great. I'm like, I'm really proud of you. You did exactly what your mind and body needed you to do. And then they look at me and they're like, what? No, I'm here because this was a mistake and a problem. And like for an example, a new lieutenant, first day on the job, gets a fire that morning, and he tells me, I hesitated. He was labeling it as hesitation and a problem. And when I really dug into the situation and asked what was going on, he thought of everything he should have. We're on stairs. I need to sound the floor. I have three people behind me. Like all these different things were going through his mind, added up to maybe 20 seconds or less. He was harping on himself for hesitation, right? And I said, I don't know, sounds like you know too much, and that for 20 seconds you had to think about the scenario before you moved forward like a true leader. And so
Mm.
the other thing is, like you said, you have to get curious instead of judging yourself, instead of going right to the I shouldn't be feeling this. I was like, what excellent leadership was that? Like, that's the kind of person I would want. Or another situation I think about, I hear a lot of is, you're on a chaotic scene and the paramedic is kind of spinning in circles, wondering, where do I even go? Where do I even start?
Mm.
And I was like, well, that is also your brain trying to protect itself. It's kind
Yeah.
of pulling away for a moment. And you could have said, instead of spinning in circles, I clearly need to stop and observe. That's all your body was asking you to do. And so a lot of times I ask them, can we be comfortable with discomfort? As you notice the information coming in, you spend some time noticing it and observing it, and you make your decision. But a rookie is very quick. They're trying to be fast and furious and impressive. And so it's very different than a senior guy who's like, I've seen this before 50 times and my brain is trying to gather, you know? So I think that it's so important to say, do we need to also separate what's overprotective or judgmental versus, dude, you know a lot of stuff. It takes a minute to sort through.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. And we call it being that curious observer. It's okay. Observe what's happening, be curious about it, and then make a decision. You don't have to rapidly make decision there and then. It's
The
okay to
difference
pause.
between a probie and a professional, if you ask
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
And
true.
then when people get permission to do that, be like, oh, that's professional, that's experienced, that means
Yeah,
veteran, and I don't have to be salty. It's so much
yeah,
better.
yeah, yeah. Teach
All
that at
right.
school.
Yes. So we're jumping into brain retraining. What is
Mm.
brain retraining and what is someone actually practicing when they do it?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to just discussing neuroplasticity again. So, as a reminder, it's our brain's ability to change and adapt in response to experiences, attention, and repetition. So, as I said, our brain is constantly learning from what we repeatedly do, what we think as well, very important, and what we notice. And that's how we acquire skills, we build habits, and we become really efficient at tasks. So the same learning process can happen with protective responses, as I said. So the brain repeatedly, if it experiences danger, stress, trauma, it becomes very efficient at recognizing anything that might signal threat. And certain responses then become increasingly automatic. Not because you're choosing them, I just want to say that we're not consciously choosing these, but because your brain has practiced that pathway so many times. So, brain retraining is about really deliberately using that capacity of neuroplasticity to practice and learn new responses. So, those automatic patterns might involve attention, interpretation, behavior, or the way that we respond to physical sensations. So, a common one is just being a first responder in general, your heart racing. It might be that your learn pathway is my heart's racing, something's going to go wrong right now. And this then leads you to scan your body, become frightened of what you notice, monitor really closely, and become activated. So brain retraining introduces another possibility. So instead of immediately following that pathway, okay, my heart is racing, my nervous system's activated. But before I decide what this means, I'm going to take a beat, that pause. I'm going to check whether there is danger or no danger. And I'm going to reduce some of that threat meaning that I'm attaching to this sensation right now. And I'm going to deliberately bring my attention back to this very present moment in my environment. You're not pretending that this sensation isn't real or it's not happening, and you're not telling yourself that every symptom is harmless, but you're changing what happens after that sensation appears. And the distinction is really important because repeated reactions can strengthen patterns, but new learned experiences can create new patterns as well. So I often compare it with training in policing. You'd never practice a defensive tactic and expect it to become automatically there during a high pressure incident. You practice it repeatedly because repetition makes that response easier for your brain to and body to access. Kind of like your tap dancing. The more you practice, the easier it is to access in that situation where you're doing your recital, for example. Over time, through neuroplasticity, that pathway becomes more familiar and more available to you as well. And that's really what we're doing at Reorigin when we're doing brain retraining. We're talking about the science of neuroplasticity and turning it into structured, repeatable practices that help people work with learn protective patterns rather than feeling as though you're controlled by them.
I love it. I try to explain it as it's just learning to tie your shoes, guys. Like when you were a little one and you were trying to tie your shoes, it was so overwhelming to think, tuck one under the other, pull, make a bow. How the hell do you do that? Why you got this other string over here and wrap it around? But now as adults, you're out the door before your shoe is tied. Like your brain doesn't even have to think about it because it can tie the shoe. And so I try to give them that kind of hope that if you just keep tying your psychological shoe, eventually it's just a part of the way that you live. You don't need Velcro shoes. We
Yeah.
could do this.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Everyone that has a brain is capable of learning new skills and neuroplasticity. That's it.
Period.
Yeah.
So how is brain retraining different from positive thinking or ignoring symptoms by telling yourself that you're safe?
Yeah, I think that this is one of the biggest misconceptions about brain retraining. From an outsider, it can sound as though you are just trying to think positively or just convince yourself that everything is absolutely fine. It's not what we mean. It's not about standing in front of your mirror every morning and saying everything's wonderful and I'm going to have this great day, whilst at the same time your body is feeling very different about that. And it's not ignoring genuine symptoms or illness or danger. It's telling ourselves that we're safe. And most people with anxiety, hypervigilance, any trauma related symptoms would recover very quickly because intellectually, as I said, we already know that we're sitting at home, the door's locked, nothing dangerous is happening. But the difficulty is that those faster protection systems in our brain and body are responding as though there's a threat. And brain retraining is more, I would say, more than something that's purely cognitive, because you're giving your brain repeated opportunities to have that different experience. So it might involve shifting your attention away, being that curious observer, away from monitoring, responding differently to a physical sensation. We use imagery, we bilateral stimulation, you spoke about that. We use bilateral stimulation. We talk about orientating to the present moment, gradually approaching something that you've learnt. We use something called incremental training. So working towards or away from something just in tiny, tiny doses. And often we pair that with our body based regulation, because the nervous system learns from what's happening in the whole experience, not just from what you're saying out of your mouth. So instead of the message being, I'm safe, while your body might still be in this full alarm, learning becomes something more like, okay, my body reacted strongly. I noticed it. I stayed present. I checked what was happening. I responded differently. And this is with body-based tools as well. And that eventual activation changes. So this creates a much broader and richer learning experience. And from a neuroplasticity perspective, every time that you respond in a new way, you're giving your brain another piece of evidence that that automatic prediction is not the only possible outcome. And over time, those repeated experiences can then strengthen, and the alternative pathways, so the protective responses become less dominant. So you have that choice of using Velcro or actually tying up your shoelace. And that's very different from, that forced positivity that sometimes people think that we're all about.
Yes. And I think in the beginning, it sounds like, okay, it's not happening right now, but it could, right? Yes, it
Yeah.
could, but it's not happening right now. But then they'll argue with me, but it could, right? And I'm like,
Mm.
but should we be in the it could energy right now? Should we actually be in the it's not right now? So that present day moment training too is really a part of the beginning of understanding. I respect that this danger could happen, but since it's not right now, I'm not going to activate my nervous system for it.
That's so
So,
true. Everyone always says, but it could, but what if it does? But what if it doesn't? There's that
right,
side of it. What if it doesn't?
right. Like
Let's practice that.
I tell them I trust that if the bad guy comes through the door right now, you've got that handled. What you don't have handled is sitting here with me in a quiet state where you're comfortable. So
So
let's do
true.
that.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
All right. So the next one, where do somatic practices fit into recovery from trauma and prolonged stress?
And I think that this is where body-based work becomes really valuable. As we spoke about, trauma responses aren't just cognitive. You can understand everything intellectually and notice that your jaw is clenched, or your shoulders are up here. Your breathing has become really shallowed, or as you just like concave, as though you're trying to just protect your body. Somatics simply means that you're working with what is happening in your body. So that it might involve movement, very small movement, breath work, grounding, noticing physical sensations, changing your posture, or deliberately allowing your body to experience a little more support. But it doesn't mean that you have to dive into the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you. For a lot of people, for most people, that would be very inappropriate or very overwhelming. Just start gently. What do my feet feel like on the floor? Can I feel the support of this chair beneath me? Can I look around the room, or just let my shoulders drop by just 2%? I think you said that at the start, actually, let your shoulders drop by 1%. Those small things there. So we're building capacity rather than forcing relaxation. And I will say that that's reflected in Reorigin's trauma material too. So neuroplasticity, brain retraining, and somatic practices are used together rather than treating trauma as purely a thinking problem.
I have learned to tell first responders that when you leave my office, because I've watched them walk sideways down this hallway right here afterwards a little bit, to get downstairs, get in your car, take a breath before you drive away,
Yeah, love that.
and pay attention to your body. But even before we do that, because our sessions sometimes can be so intense, I have learned to do something called comfortable place or aftercare through EMDR and trauma informed practice, where we take the last 10 minutes to breathe, to unclench the jaw, to relax the space between your eyebrows at the top of your nose, havening and even making like a little heart shape around the face and just sort of feeling your toes, wiggling your fingers. And at first they might think that that's a little wacky, but then they're like, I'm really glad we did that before we left last session. That was actually, that was important. That was a little intense. And I'm like, your body is a part of it. So,
Yeah.
I think if you're doing first responder psychological support correctly, there will be an activation. You do have to train with them how to de-escalate that. But even then, like I said, I'm like, you'll be okay by the time you get downstairs, but feel your body between here and getting to your car. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think probably before they've seen you, they've never done anything like that. And you would think that it's a little wacky, or you'd be like, why am I wiggling my toes? What's that gonna do? Wiggling
Yeah.
my fingers. Yeah. Um, but then, like you say, when they reflect on that, actually that's a huge, huge thing. And it's really, really helpful. So it's those small, small things like the bilateral stimulation, the dropping of the shoulders, the breath work, the havening that someone hasn't done before. Just that 10 minutes can make such a huge, huge difference.
It's huge because they're masking in front of me. They're sizing me up so
Yeah.
much in the beginning that they don't even know that they were masking that hard until I help them relax their body. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's a big part of the whole shebang that, right?
Yeah.
That's a clinical term, the shebang of trauma-informed counseling.
I'm going to take that word with me. Shebang.
Right. The shebang. The next one is, could you share a simple somatic or nervous system practice that might help an officer transition out of work mode after a difficult shift?
And I think that we need to be keeping this very practical and short because I don't know how long the shifts are, but here they're 12 hours. So it's a long time to then just come home and think I have to do a half an hour routine. Just as very simple practice, kind of exactly like you were saying there, but that 10 minutes is more than enough. Give yourself a couple of minutes before you walk through your door at home to just deliberately notice and acknowledge that the context has changed. Look around you, just take in your environment. Let your eyes move naturally and just notice any neutral things in your environment. You might be in your car, look outside a tree, the sky, the houses around you. It might sound very, very simple, but after a difficult shift, your attention has been trained to look towards threats. But deliberately orienteering in that present moment gives your brain that update that I'm safe, that I'm not there anymore, I'm here and I can relax. And bring some of that attention into your body. So, as I said, feel yourself against your chair, your car seat, wherever you are, notice the support beneath you. Can you feel your toes in your boot, in your shoes, and allow your shoulders to just drop and unclench your jaw, put your hands in your lap, let your hands relax, and then just take in a deep breath and an audible sigh. I use the audible sigh all of the time. Relax. It's a really quick way to reset your nervous system. And then you might even just say to acknowledge it, the shift's ended and I'm home now. Okay. And notice what you're moving towards and what you're leaving behind. I think that that's something that'll only take a couple of minutes, but will make a huge difference.
I think I keep adding, but I want to add, I'll say something like take a nice deep breath in, and on the exhale, close your eyes and just take a moment to notice your breath. You
Yeah.
don't have to interfere with it. Just notice that you're breathing. I say
Yeah.
that every day in my office. And then I try to help them acknowledge, again, that connection to the body, that there's just these small little things you could do for yourself to re-regulate and co-regulate with other people. So
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
We're in it. We know, right? Right.
We
This is so
know. We
great. It's so
know.
fun. So this next one, it says, could you leave listeners with a few practical tools they can use when they notice themselves feeling tense, overwhelmed, numb, or stuck in high alert, maybe even after they've tried some of these things?
Yeah, the first one I'm a really big fan of is that orient. So slowly looking around where you are, notice where you are. Three neutral things that you can see. And I always think it just sounds so basic, but when we're in that threat mode, our attention becomes very narrow. So orienting deliberately brings in the information to look to not just be stuck. You use your peripheral vision. And then secondly is make your exhale, talking about breath work, slightly longer than your inhale. That is it's coined as it's got a really long name, and it was coined by this person who was like a exceptional triathlete, and Andrew Huberman uses it a lot. I can't remember what the term he calls it, but anything where your exhale is longer than your inhale, you're giving your nervous system a chance to calm down. You're reminding yourself, I am safe. So that is huge. And you don't need to, importantly, force huge breaths. Just soften your breathing and allow that out breath to even just be slightly longer. We don't need to be doing box breathing. Everyone's always like, oh, I hate breath work because it's box breathing. You don't need to do that. Just one deep breath is enough. We don't need to be sitting there going four in, hold for four, out for four. Don't worry about that. And then another one I like is physical contact or pressure. So again, your feet in the floor, hands even on your thighs, your back against the chair. Give your nervous system clear sensory information about where your body is. And then another one is to change the question. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, like the what if. So instead of, well, how do I just get rid of this feeling? What does my nervous system need for just 30 seconds? Maybe it's something as simple as just a bit of movement, walking down the street. Maybe it's space. Maybe it's permission to slow down, or maybe it's connection with someone else. And I will say that the goal is not to think, well, I've done this and I'm not calm. Something's wrong. Regulating is just something that you do to stop fighting with yourself and give your body permission to just relax and slow down. And even if you don't think that it's done anything, I guarantee you it has.
I agree. And the long word I know for breath work is pranayam, and it looks like pranayama. It's a
Mhm.
Sanskrit word that we use in yoga, but it means breath work. And looking up different types of breath work could be so helpful. And I also add, when their eyes are closed and they're breathing in front of me, I say, and now thank yourself for doing weird therapy, because not many people would come in and try to figure this out. And then they usually laugh or smile a little bit because I'm like, I know it's a little weird that I told you I do handstands sometimes between sessions, you know,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
regulate myself. But I seriously listen to the amount of dead baby cases, murders, suicides, car accidents, homes burning down,
Mhm.
bad guy stories. Like, yeah, sometimes when you go, I don't get the next person because I laid on my floor, or I do that handstand, which is probably my favorite one right now. Um, or I sit in this chair and I just kind of look up and go, okay. And that's all
Yeah.
nervous system regulation. Or I couldn't
Yeah.
do this work either.
And it's interesting you say about thank you for giving myself. So in Reorigin, we talk about thanking your limbic system. So thank you, limbic system, for trying to protect me, because your nervous system's just trying to do its job. But we need to say thank you. We're not trying to fight it, but you can be calm. Everything's okay. We don't need you to be on high alert. So it's really interesting you actually say that to clients. I love that.
Yeah, well, because again, I treat mostly men who don't want to have a psychology at all, it seems. And
Yeah.
so when they're meeting their nervous system and their psychology for the first time, it's weird to them. It
Yeah.
feels wrong to them. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, this is wise.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I love that you do handstands in your office. That's great.
That's the yoga thing has taught me so much about, regulating my nervous system and including my body in digesting all the things that I do for a living. Because it wasn't easy and it piled up on me when I was young
Mhm.
and I had to figure that out. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. And translating college textbook into reality, they're completely two different things.
Yeah. And I think that's very well for first responders as well, isn't it? You're learning all of this stuff in a classroom. Doesn't really translate when you're out in real life. You just react completely differently to how you're told that you should be in this textbook, because we all react differently. We're all different humans. So
Yeah.
yeah, doesn't
And we have different histories and everything.
yeah.
Um, So we're in the last stretch of a chunk of questions, but I still want to take our time and just allow this to be what it's becoming because I'm loving it. But the question is, how does Reorigin support someone experiencing trauma-related stress or nervous system dysregulation?
Yeah, and I think this is where all of these ideas really come together because Reorigin is designed to take the science of what we've been talking about and turns it into something that people can practice in everyday life. So Reorigin is a structured neuroplasticity program and it helps us understand what is happening in the brain and nervous system, recognize these patterns, and then begin a different response. And education is important because when you understand why you're hypervigilant or why certain situations might trigger a really strong response or why your body seems to react in a certain way, the experiences then can become a lot less frightening. But importantly, understanding doesn't change these automatic patterns. You know, you can read all the books you want on nervous system work and neuroplasticity, but you have to do the work. So you can completely understand why you're scanning a room, why your heart races in certain situations, or why you struggle to switch off, but you still find yourself doing it. But the biggest part is practice. So we work with things such as attention, nervous system regulation, brain retraining, somatic practices. So someone begins to recognize what their particular patterns are and what may be reinforcing them. And for one person, it might be that you're scanning your body for symptoms. For someone else, it might be that you're constantly checking the environment or you're avoiding anything that creates a discomfort. Um, it's so broad and so varied what people find themselves doing as protective patterns. But once you recognize the patterns, you begin practicing an alternative response rather than following that automatic same pathway. And because neuroplasticity is driven by repetition, we're not saying that 1 week at Reorigin will change your life. It's about repeatedly giving your brain and body this new, different experience. So those responses gradually become more available. And one of the things that I love about Reorigin is the goal isn't to become very good at regulating yourself whilst sitting in complete silence. It's about being able to get your life back and just respond more rationally to things. You can use these skills when someone really annoys you, when something unexpected happens, when your body produces an uncomfortable sensation, when you're tired. I've just created a menopause program because we've realized that actually, there's so much happening in a female body when we're going through perimenopause and menopause. We can use brain retraining to help with that. There's so much that brain retraining can help with. And real world application is really, really important. So our program combines all of these structured techniques, guided practices, education with a community, and optional coaching as well. And I think that there's something relevant about this for first responders because there is that population that understands training incredibly well. You understand that you don't practice a skill once and then expect it to become automatically available under pressure. You rehearse, you repeat, and you become familiar, and then you access it when you need to. And you are applying that in neuroplasticity. So the aim isn't to take away, as I said, these protective responses that have served you very well in your career. It's to just help you become more flexible. And I want to just also say really importantly here that Reorigin is not positioned as a replacement for therapy, for medical care or professional support. It sits alongside these things and it's a practical way for someone to work with your brain and body and your nervous system as well.
And it's definitely a part of the therapy that we do. And at least I think we can't have the therapy without what you're doing actually. So I agree it's not a replacement, but it is a huge part of the healing. I'm not sure how else you could.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I already gave my examples of tap dancing and yoga and reading new books to expand and push my mind into other places so that I'm not just constantly in the therapist role, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so all of that's so true. My next question is, what role does education, coaching, community play, particularly for first responders who feel isolated, believe nobody outside the profession understands them?
Yeah, and I think education, I think I said this earlier, but it can really immediately reduce some of that fear because when you don't understand why you're feeling so jumpy or you're detached or you're unable to switch off, it can feel as though something you can't comprehend what's happening to you or in your body. And when you begin to understand that your brain may have learnt this pattern, because you've spent years in situations where anticipating this danger has kept you safe and other people safe as well, that starts to make sense. And it changes the story from, well, what's wrong with me to something like my system has learned something and it's learned it really effectively. And now I can help it learn something different. And I think that that understanding really matters. You know, but again, information is not enough. You can know exactly what hypervigilance is, but still find yourself scanning that room. You can understand, well, yeah, exactly. You can understand all the nervous system regulation, but forget all of your tools when something triggers you. And that's where coaching can actually really help because it bridges the gap between knowing what to do and how to apply it in real life. So a coach can help someone recognize your patterns more intricately and notice where that person might be getting stuck and adapt the practices to help you in a very situation and in a very situation that might help you more so. And then I would say that community addresses something really important, which is isolation. A lot of people that deal with prolonged stress or trauma related symptoms, even general nervous system dysregulation, often feel as though nobody around them actually understands what's happening. And as we've said, they might look completely capable, and internally they're feeling, I can't keep everything together. And that can be very complicated for people like first responders because there's that very real sense that people outside of their profession may never understand what the job asks of you. And I would never pretend that otherwise. But somebody who's never done the job may not understand what it is it's like to move between ordinary life and then a very distressing or very dangerous situation, or what it feels like to remain completely composed whilst dealing with things that people would in general world are never ever going to see. But they can understand what it feels like when your nervous system won't stand down, and they can understand hypervigilance, numbness, fear, all of these physical symptoms and exhaustion. And that shared experience can actually be really powerful because it reduces the sense that you're somehow failing at something everybody else seems to be managing. So I would say that Reorigin actually intentionally combines that education with community and coaching. Not everyone takes coaching though. It's not, it's not prerequisite, rather than expecting you to work through everything completely alone. And it's designed to help you understand, practice differently, and get support whilst you're doing that. And I really think connection matters. Recovery and healing can be very lonely when your world simply starts to evolve around symptoms. Having people around you who understand the process, who encourage you and remind you that, progress is not linear. It can help you keep going and help you feel understood, which is so important.
It is. And maybe this is going to sound a little bit negative, but this is where I worry about peer support teams right now, is that they have a lot of information, they have a lot of knowledge, they've never gotten to the other side for themselves, and yet they're providing peer support to other first responders. And so I'm like, okay, we have the walking wounded and the blind leading the blind, but I love that you got the information. I love that you have the knowledge. I love that you downloaded that app for your department or that something started. But what you're talking about, I clinically and intuitively trust so much more because it's very real. It's the real path to getting to the other side, not just a bunch of fancy words where it's like, now I'm a peer supporter and somehow there's like a hierarchy. I'm a peer supporter, you're not. I can tell you something, but I haven't even felt the calm yet myself.
Yeah, yeah. And I think as well, talking of like apps and people helping each other, what I want to say as well about like the community at Reorigin that is slightly different is we don't talk about symptoms. We don't focus on symptoms. We focus on where we're going. You can join all of these groups on Facebook and all of these posts where people are comparing symptoms and talking about symptoms. And, people are like, oh, well, I've done this and it really helped me. That's not really going to translate, and we're not going to go down these rabbit holes. So we try to focus on where we're going and what we're changing and how we're growing and learning, and we celebrate each other's wins. And that can be something like, oh, my heart raced today, and I didn't immediately go to a 10. I went to a 7, and everyone cheers each other on, and we look at where we're going and what we've got to achieve. So that's a really huge part of community as well.
I love that part. The next question is, can reorigin be used alongside trauma-focused therapy, medical care, and professional support? We touched on it, but anything more with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, and I again just want to say it's not a replacement again for medical care or trauma focused therapy. It really sits alongside e they both sit alongside each other. Somebody may be working on a particular traumatic experience whilst also using nervous system skills in everyday life. Someone might be receiving medical treatment for a physical condition and also noticing at the same time that stress may have made their nervous system more reactive, not mutually exclusive. But I would be very wary of telling anybody that if they've found one explanation before everything else should be abandoned. Human beings are way more complicated than that. And if you, I think, well, firstly, I think that reorigin fits into that everyday practice place. So learning how your nervous system responds, developing those regulation skills, working with your protective patterns and building that flexibility. And if you're already under professional care, always encourage you to continue making treatment decisions and the appropriate care plan needed for you, not to change your medication without speaking to a healthcare professional, just because of something that you might have seen or learned in a program.
It's so great that you're doing, I would call it like the liability talk, but I also want to tell therapists that might be listening to this podcast, if you're treating a first responder, do not hoard your client. Encourage them to go to a group, to try the neuroplasticity training, to do, yes, the peer support education. Like, let them go out there and experience other therapies or different forms of help and support. I think sometimes in my field, we might feel that thing I mentioned before, I'm not good enough, and so I'm going to maybe hoard this practice. Um, and that might sound unlikely or unusual, but so many times I do run into other counselors who seem to me like they're telling me, I know what I'm doing. I have done this for so long. Dare I say, I might have sounded like that myself when I said I've been doing this for 20 years or something. But it's like, back down a little bit, open up and know that it's a path. And when I talk about the name of my practice is the self-care path. And I've already mentioned the many different things I've done recently. But if I go back through the years, there's so many nervous system recalibrations that I had to do to allow myself to do this work. So it wasn't just my own therapy. It wasn't just taking care of my teeth, my eyes, my body. There was a path, and a journey through all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think that anyone that has been on a healing journey, you know that everyone that you've seen has helped you in some way. So it's not just one therapist, it's not just one program that helps you, it's everything combined. That's my personal opinion anyway.
Yes, yes. And I just want to keep reminding, like, keep encouraging people to expand however
Yeah.
that's possible.
Yeah.
So who is Reorigin designed to help and who may need different or more specialized support?
Yeah, I think it's designed for anyone who recognizes any persistent patterns, stress, sensitivity, anxiety, fear around symptoms, trouble switching off. We deal with people with chronic Lyme as well, long COVID, lots of chronic symptoms. As we spoke about, your nervous system tends to get switched off, a lot of chronic fatigue as well. Um, and it can be helpful for anyone who wants to understand more about neuroplasticity, and learned practical ways of working with both your brain and your nervous system, rather than just feeling as though, well, those responses are there, so that's me now. Want to learn and want to do something. And for someone with trauma related stress, that might mean learning to recognize when that old pattern has been activated, understanding why certain situations or sensations feel very threatening, and then gradually practice different responses so that your brain becomes better at distinguishing between what happened now and what it's learned in the past. But equally, I need to be clear about what it's not as well. It's not like, yeah, this massive disclaimer, but I don't want people listening and thinking this is going to fix everything in my world. If you are, you have severe mental health crisis, you're actively feeling suicidal, or you're very dependent on substances, or you need specialist treatment, then our online neuroplasticity program is not your primary source of support. It's important to say that. But working alongside, as we've mentioned here several times, is really, really important. I see Reorigin as part of a wider support picture for a lot of people. It's education, it's structured practice, it's brain, nervous system regulation tools, community coaching, but it's not emergency care. So that's really important to say. And I think that making or being clear about those boundaries actually makes the work stronger, because we're not claiming, as I've said, one program is going to be everything to everyone, but we're offering a real practical and structured way for people to work with their brain and nervous system patterns, whilst also recognizing that some people do need personalized support along the way.
Absolutely. And boy, I almost lost what I wanted to say about that. What is it? I might have lost it, so I'll leave it. But whatever you
Yeah,
said just now, that my brain said, nope, we're going to move on to the next question. I know it's important, and it resonated something within me. I'll come back to it if it jumps
yeah,
in.
of course.
Um, but though, oh, now it comes, right? If you have a high risk ideation, right, and there is an emergency, that's a different kind of care and a different level of care. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah,
And that it's all part of that journey or path that I had just mentioned, and we kind of zigzag through that. So,
yeah.
okay. So here we have the next section. What could police forces and emergency service organizations do differently to support the nervous system before someone reaches burnout or a crisis?
So much. I think moving from a crisis model to a maintenance model might be the first thing. You know, we currently notice when someone is struggling by the fact that they're off sick, or they're outwardly having panic attacks, can't sleep, they're burnt out. Nobody takes that approach to physical operational readiness. So imagine saying, we're not going to think about physical fitness until we're unable to walk up 2 stairs. That would be ridiculous. I think that regulation and recovery needs to be taught a lot earlier. People should understand what happens to them during acute stress. They should be taught that understanding how important it is to come down afterwards really does matter. Supervision is a huge thing, particularly after difficult instances. It should be normalized that we go and speak to a supervisor and we debrief, a community talk, speak it out. And I know that I know that I'm asking for a lot here, and supervisors might be listening and thinking, well, I haven't got time for this, or what are they on about? But these small changes can make such a huge, huge difference. Two officers not going off sick, not retiring early, not leaving their job, and being able to cope a lot better. Um, we can look at the cumulative burden rather than just one incident. I think it's important to recognize and address that. If senior people never acknowledge stress, that cultural message just remains that, real police, we just get on with it. We just get on with it. And then that well-being poster is never, ever going to change. So that ultimate goal should be producing officers that are not only really good at activating when you're required to do so, but become really good at recovering afterwards. I think that, to me, would be genuine resilience, what we spoke about there. I just don't have the answers for how we're going to do that.
I wrote an article that anybody can request and I'll send it to them. And it just says, make it safe, make it change, make it a norm. And
Mm,
it gives you 13 ways to make your department more of a maintenance, department and not a crisis reaction. that you guys respond to so many crises, but you react to your own. And we have to, switch that culture from, the ground up. So,
Hmm.
and it's just beginning ideas about taking responsibility and accountability for your own mental health and well-being while being a trauma worker. And I've literally talked to labor attorneys that are like very adverse to that. They're like, then every call is a liability and every call could be compensated for. And I'm like, stop, don't, we're not trying to get everyone a psych pension. We are just trying to make sure everyone can retire with their integrity intact.
Yeah. 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 I,
Yes.
I expect the people that are saying that their nervous systems are really on high alert if they're saying, then we
Uh,
need to
but
think about it.
but I'm crazy. I'm the crazy therapist.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, but okay, we're getting there. And I've seen a huge cultural change and shift since I started doing this work. And even
Good.
I have grown and developed quite a bit over the 20 years. Um, but some departments are nowhere near the beginning. And
Yeah,
so I love your suggestion. We have to change the culture,
we
from
do.
the bottom. So next, what would you say to a first responder who believes that asking for help means that you are weak or no longer capable of doing the job?
I would ask them to think about what their job has actually required of their nervous system over the years. They've probably spent a huge amount of time overriding normal human responses. You have to run toward, I think you said this, like run towards the danger.
Yes.
A lot of the time, where most people would actually instinctively run the opposite way. And you've had to stay composed in situations where most people wouldn't be able to do that. You've had to make really, really important decisions whilst your own adrenaline has, you know, been on high alert, and you've had to put other people's needs ahead of yours. So if your system eventually reaches a point where it needs some support, that is not evidence that you are weak. It's evidence that what your job has asked of a human brain and body over time is not natural. And I think that one of the most damaging ideas within the emergency service is that competence and vulnerability can't exist in the same person. They absolutely can. You can be incredibly brave and experience anxiety. You should, those that goes hand in hand. You can be an excellent police officer and struggle with sleep. And you can remain calm enough to save somebody's life and still be deeply affected by what you've witnessed. We need to normalize this. None of this takes away from your competence or, every success that you've dealt with. And I think asking for help goes back to that word resilience, actually. It can be a form of resilience. It means that you've recognized that something has perhaps changed, and you're doing something about it before you reach that point where you are completely depleted. You know, we'd never tell a officer to ignore a physical injury, um, because treatment somehow means you're weak,
Yeah.
And I think that we need to become much better at applying that same logic to the brain and nervous system. So getting support doesn't mean that you're incapable of doing your job. In many cases, it's what helps people do their job. It protects your health, it protects your relationships, and your ability to continue doing things that matter to you.
I think one of my main tools in my toolbox as a therapist is to tell them that I still have to do all of this work because
Yeah,
of what I do for a living. And I
yeah,
may not be out there as a first responder, but listening to them for years on end has affected me in many different ways. And so I kind of look at them and say, if I needed to do it, I don't see myself as a failure. I don't think something's wrong. It's very reasonable that I have to take care of myself, considering what I'm doing. I also wanted to say that bravery is not the absence of fear. You have to be
mhm.
brave because there is fear.
Love that.
So, yeah, learning to reconcile that and accept that so that you know how to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to say to that too is that my younger police and firefighters in particular are really unique and different compared to the older ones. They will come in and say, I don't want to become an alcoholic. I do not want a divorce. I want my children to love and respect me and see me as their mom or dad. I don't want to leave on injury unnecessarily or quit and become a salesman. So what's this stuff you're talking about?
Right.
And I want to tell the older guys, it's different now. You have permission. And as you keep reiterating, it is not too late.
Absolutely. It's never, ever too late to start this, ever.
Yes. Last question, and we've done it, Natalie. Um, for someone listening who recognizes themselves in the conversation, what is one small first step that they could take today?
Yeah, I think I would encourage them to start with awareness rather than trying to just fix everything at once, which can be really tempting. And we've all tried, I'm sure. But just take 30 seconds at some point, just today, and notice what your nervous system is doing. You might actually just ask yourself, is there danger right now? Or is it just my body thinks there is? And then take in where you are, look around the room, as I've said, feet against your floor, notice the support under you, and just allow a couple of breaths to move slowly. Don't pick up your phone. Really importantly, just try to be where you are. Don't force yourself to calm down. Just begin to notice the difference between what's happening in the present moment and what your nervous system might be predicting is going to happen. And change the way that you speak to yourself about the reaction. Instead of being like, I need to toughen up, or what is wrong with me? You might just begin with, okay, my nervous system's become really good at protecting me, but maybe I can start helping it to recognize that that level of protection isn't necessary. And that shift from fighting to understanding is a really important first step. You said about the pause, so important to pause and notice. And if somebody is listening and they recognize themselves and thinks, this is exactly what's happening to me, that's very much what we're here to help with at Reorigin as well. Ultimately, the goal is to not spend the rest of your life monitoring and managing your nervous system, but become at one with your nervous system so you can spend less time thinking about it and more time getting back to the things that matter, your relationships, your interests, enjoying work, and parts of yourself that make you feel like you again.
That's so beautiful. And um, in my practice, we'll say notice to cultivate a self-awareness, to recognize your patterns so that you can choose to change. So those 4 steps, and you just said it so beautifully. And I can't thank you enough for all this information, for being willing to record it with me, or even asking, I should say, like she messaged me and said, let's talk about this. And I just feel so honored, and it's been such a pleasure. I would love for you to give us your name again and a website, or maybe a little direction if somebody wants more information.
Absolutely. So, my name is Natalie Rivens, and you can find us at reorigin.com. And we also have a YouTube channel, which is Reorigin, where we offer free neuroplasticity exercises, nervous system regulation exercises every single week. So, if you're thinking, I don't really want to sign up to the program, or I just want an introduction to what it's like at Reorigin and all this nervous system stuff we're talking about, you can try us there first.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And I'll remind everybody that my name is Sarah Gura. I'm a master's level licensed clinical professional counselor in Illinois and a licensed mental health counselor here in Florida. My practice is the self-care path, and I specialize in treating first responders. My website is selfcarepath.com. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and take good care.